EM Weekly starting right now, bringing emergency managers from around the world together to learn, share and collaborate.
And welcome to EM Weekly, and this is your host Todd DeVoe speaking, and I have with me my co-host Dan Scott, and today we have special guest Glen Tate. And Glen and his wife Shelby, we'll get into how they met in a minute, have written some interesting books. And like I was saying before, as I love to read, and bringing in authors about why they've written the books and stuff like this is important. And I know we normally focus on the nonfiction books that are about disasters or how to prevent them, or not prevent them, but to respond to them and whatnot, right? But since we're coming into November, and what is November? November is the great book giveaway, and we talk about books that you can buy for people that for Christmas, and the 299-day series, and then also with Shelby's books, the Great State, are some books that you might be interested in reading just for fun, but it might scare you a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. So before we get into this, I was talking to a gentleman the other day, and he has an organization that he's supporting called Working Wardrobes. And he has a t-shirt that he created called Higher Power. And that's a show that he does on the Sitch Radio Network. And with the Higher Power group, every t-shirt you buy, the money goes directly into Working Wardrobes. And the Working Wardrobes is there for people who are down in their luck and then are getting clothing so they can go for job interviews to be able to support themselves. I think it's a great organization. And so we'll include that link to buy the t-shirt so you can support Working Wardrobes. And I want to thank everybody ahead of time for buying a t-shirt. I'm going to buy a couple of them actually. So Glen, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I was going to say thank you for having us. At the last minute, Shelby was unable to join us, but she was very, very glad to be on the show. We're kind of competitive. We're married. You know how that kind of happens. And she wanted me to tell everybody. So I am, honey. I'm sure you'll listen to this, that she was asked on the show because of her books. And then it was, oh yeah. And how about Glen too? So she was the primary. I'm the secondary. I'm totally cool with that.
So Glen, the 299-day series, which is an interesting concept that you wrote a while ago, right?
Yes.
Talks a little bit about a financial collapse, a societal collapse, and just sort of how people reacted to it. And this book, I think, was one of the ones I think was interesting because, like, a lot of the people that are in disaster preparedness in the CERT programs and stuff like this found it interesting. Kind of turned me on to it, and and it's a fun and interesting read. I say fun because hopefully it stays fantasy, but
yeah,
with a lot of stuff that's been going on lately, especially up in Portland, and seeing some of the violence and unrest that's up there, and then of course this contentious election cycle we have here, could it possibly come true? And I hope not. That's my goal is I hope it doesn't come true. But what made you write?
It is an amazing story. I love telling it. The answer is the Easter Bunny. And I know all your listeners now are saying, oh, great, they booked a guy who's absolutely certifiably insane. I mean, now I have to listen to the ramblings of a lunatic. Stick with me on this. I just like the book one is 97% true. I am Grant Mattson. It's all basically about me and my kind of unvarnished entry into the preparedness world. And I want to pause for a moment and say, preparedness, there's no wacky conspiracy theories. There's no crazy stuff. And I'll just be candid because it's an important point now. There's no racial stuff. This is not any of that kind of stuff because that stuff's BS and hokey. Anyway, back to the story about the Easter Bunny. I was preparing when I was married to my first wife, who's not Shelby. Shelby's my second wife. And my first wife was extremely hostile to this entire idea that I had that maybe things wouldn't always be just perfect and there wouldn't always be goat cheese, fresh goat cheese in the supermarket, that sort of thing. And so I started preparing a little bit. It was always very rational. There was no debt involved and never broke any laws. I mean, you don't need a sawed-off shotgun or some crazy thing like that. So I was doing it pretty rationally. And I realized that I needed an explanation for her for her to save face, which is fair and legitimate. And I needed an explanation when some big event happened, and I rolled out all this stuff that I had hidden in a rented storage locker. I needed to have an explanation for where all this stuff came from. And so I came up with, and you can see that this is this is not some big professional marketing. I came up with the Easter Bunny, and what the Easter Bunny, how that figures in is it was going to be a speech, and I was going to say, honey, the Easter Bunny came by, and the Easter Bunny brought this stuff. That was a face-saving way. And I was going to say, here's what this stuff is, here's why this is important, and here's what we're going to do with it. And so I'm a lawyer, I'm a litigator actually. So I present information all the time. And I realized I needed for probably, because this is kind of a why in the road for this marriage, right? I mean, this is a time when there's a crisis. It's the absolute worst time to be a jerk, to say, I told you so, and to belittle people. It's the worst time. So I realized I needed to get this Easter Bunny speech right. I needed to put some time and effort into it. So I did what I always do, which is sketched it out on a Post-it note. I love Post-it notes. I probably buy 10,000 Post-it notes a year and use them very well. And so I started doing bullet points about what this stuff is, why I got it, and what we're going to do. It soon turned into a page, and I wrote a page, more bullet points, and then this cascade of information started pouring out of me, and I realized there was a story here, and I thought I should probably write this down. Now, I've never written fiction at this point. This is about 2011 or 2012, by the way. I've never written fiction. I don't even read fiction. And the reason is I don't have time because I'm a lawyer, right? And super busy. So I don't look like a lawyer, but that is a whole different long story that maybe I'll tell later. But I didn't even know in fiction writing, because I write legal stuff, but that doesn't count. It's entirely different kind of writing. If I didn't know in fiction, if the commas go inside the quote marks or outside, I didn't know. And so I went over to my wife's bookshelf. She reads some fiction, and there it was. And the commas do indeed go inside the quote marks, which I didn't know. So I thought, okay, I'll write this as a chapter, a little chapter, and I'll put it up on a forum I was on for free, because this Easter Bunny speech, I have to say, it was really a great explanation of why someone would prepare rationally, I might add. And so I started writing it up as the Easter Bunny speech I would give my first wife in the garage. Well, then I realized that there needed to be a chapter about me and a chapter about her, so people could understand why you have to tiptoe around this thing. Wouldn't it normally be like a great thing? It's like, oh, my husband in secret, was thinking of me and providing and taking care of and so thoughtful. And why that wasn't the tone of the Easter Bunny speech. So I did a chapter about me. I grew up in a rural area and then went to the suburbs and decided to be a lawyer. And I call it the Docker years. The 2000s, I would pretty much work all the time intensely, come home, crash on the couch, eat a huge plate of nachos and watch football, and then check out and then do it all over again. So why am I? And then I rediscovered that things could be maybe fragile, not the end of the world and not scary, but things are kind of fragile. I'm just in time inventory. You guys know this story. So why I was like I was, well, then these chapters, there started being more of them, and then enter into the story all these amazing people I know. I often say, and I'm not kidding, if you guys were around me for a lot of time, you would appreciate the authenticity of the statement. I don't think I'm cool, but I have some of the coolest friends around, some of the most interesting friends. And I was shooting with a team of guys, and I started introducing them into the story. They're amazingly interesting guys, all self-taught, all civilians. The coolest character, the one everybody loves the most, and Todd is about to nod his head, I know, is Pow, the 6-foot Korean gunfighter who sells insurance and is like this amazing, and he's exactly as I describe him. The whole story about showing up at the gun range to shoot with him and bringing a dozen donuts and stuff like that, all of this is true. And then, so this dialogue started coming out of me, and it wasn't creative. I can't stress that enough. I'm not a creative guy. I would just remember the conversations I had with Pow and with others. Enter into the story another friend of mine who at the time was a Green Beret, and he got involved, and he would take us out to the range and show us how to do stuff. And he was an amazing, interesting guy with all kinds of cool experience. Well, those are two of, it ended up being 350 named characters in the book. And it just kept going and going and going. And I was writing this in secret over a 2 to 3 year period because my wife, and this isn't the, Glen Tate says bad things about his ex-wife show, because that's not very interesting and that's really low class. I'm just going to say she was hostile. So I couldn't do it. So I'm writing all this stuff and all these dots are getting connected in my head between all these interesting people. And it's a story of and this is really critical for emergency managers, it's the story of a partial collapse. My theory, and I think this is borne out in everybody's experience, is the more dramatic something is, the less likely it is to occur. It would be dramatic if a giant comet smacked into the earth, and it could happen, but it's extremely unlikely. Well, it's less dramatic and more likely that there's a big windstorm and people are without electricity in my part of the country, 2 weeks sometimes happens, and that's pretty common elsewhere. So it's more likely. So prepare for, the 2-week power outage. And so that is the tenor of the book. And it's specifically, I call it the no comic book sort of approach. A lot of prepper fiction, and people should read it if they want, and that's cool. And there's a lot of good stuff out there. A lot of it starts off with, when I got kicked off of SEAL Team 6 for being too effective, that's not me. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I'm a suburban lawyer guy who happens to have cool friends that are like great gunfighters and Green Berets and stuff. But I am very honest when I say, wow, how did this happen? I mean, why am I included in this group?
Right. So
it's no comic book stuff. And here's an important part. I want to speak specifically to emergency managers, both professionals and students. The government is not the bad guy in these books, because no group of people is monolithically good or bad. There are plenty of government people, including, candidly, at some very high managerial levels in the emergency management world, some bad guys in my book who are, yes, indeed, bad guys. There are plenty of police officers and others who are good guys. And then there are, because see, this is reality to me. This is how I see the real world. I wasn't trying for the comic book stuff. Then there are quite a few characters. Again, I credit, it's the word I'm going to say, I credit this storyline and this approach that I had to reality. There are some people who start off marginally good and end up being kind of bad, and some people who start off kind of bad and end up being kind of good. There's a full mixture, because it's how I see life and how it plays out. So the good guys get together, go out to my cabin, which I still own, which is still an amazing place. And the good guys on the team, they're called the team with a capital T. They form up the neighborhood and do some common sense, like self-policing, and it keeps growing from there. The good guys get together. My Green Beret buddy comes into the story, and then they go and they right some wrongs at the state capitol. And then the question is, how do you rebuild? So it's 10 books. I couldn't stop writing this. That's the weird thing. I would get up at 1 a.m. and start writing, because I could not stop all the connections and the dots. And it was almost like I couldn't write fast enough. And so the audiobooks, which I recommend in part because, not because of the content, sorry, that's okay. But the narrator is mind blowing. Kevin Pierce, who's New York Times bestselling narrator, he's the king of this, especially in this genre. The audiobooks are, I think, really helpful and impactful. 90 hours of audio. So once you start these books, you're it's like a tattoo. You're making quite a commitment. It's going to be there for a while, for 90 hours at least. And there's motivation in there, and there are all kinds of little tips and tricks that you mentioned, Todd, all kinds of motivation, all kinds of mental preparation in the sense of painting a picture for folks about what a partial collapse could look like. It varies. The conditions vary greatly based on geography. And I don't just mean like Texas is well off and Chicago is like burning. I don't just mean that in a black and white sense. Even neighborhood by neighborhood, county by county,
sure,
certainly state by state. So that, in an overview, is the Easter Bunny story. And I'm glad I ended up writing that Post-it note. It's launched quite a great thing. I've now met people all over. I'm on your show. I mean, it's been a cool thing.
That's awesome. So Glenn, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to get into some questions and paralleling what you and both Shelby wrote back in the day and how it's kind of coming true. The Outer Limits Supply Company was founded on the idea of providing high-quality first aid kits. Their goal is to supply the life-saving equipment you'll need to mitigate the majority of medical or traumatic injuries often seen during austere conditions. Whether it is when you are on the outdoor adventure or your team has responded to a major crisis, the Outer Limits Supply Company provides practical, user-friendly first aid and trauma kits that anyone can use. If you enter EM Weekly at checkout, you'll receive 20% off your purchase. So go to www.outerlimitsupply.com today.
Seconds count during an emergency. That's why at Titan HST, we're always inventing new technology to help people stay safe and help people who can provide help get connected with people who need help. At Titan HST, we've deployed mesh networking, allowing emergency communication even when networks are down, augmented reality, and real-time translation. We believe in the power of people to help each other stay safe and thrive.
Are you looking for that bag to help you keep organized as you travel around? Something you can carry with you every day? Well, VanQuest was founded with a simple mission: build the toughest bags and packs for you to carry every day and to help you stay organized and prepared. VanQuest has been making the ultra-durable bags and packs since 2011, and their bags and packs are trusted by the clients such as the FBI, the U.S. Secret Service, and U.S. SOCOM. Yes, that is the U.S. Special Operations Command. Their bags and packs offer the best organization for the user-friendly experience, such as the high visibility interior for the users. And I'm telling you something, I love that orange inside the bag because I could find the things I need quickly. I love my VanQuest bag. Don't forget, they offer free shipping, 100-day return guarantee, and a lifetime warranty. And if you put in EM Weekly, all caps, all one word, you get 10% off your total purchase. VanQuest.com. Hey, welcome back from the quick break, and thank you so much for listening to our sponsors. And please reach out to them. I mean, a couple of them are giving some really great discounts with using the EM Weekly discount code, and show the support. And yeah, thank you so much. So, Glenn.
Yes, sir.
I'm really kind of bummed that Shelby's not on today because I have the number one question for her is, what is it like to time travel? Because so she wrote in her book, I guess you were saying 2016 is when she kind of wrote the manuscript. I read the book and I was reading it during the whole, or listened to the book, obviously. Obviously, I like Audible because I can do it while I'm driving. I listened to the book while all this stuff in Portland and was going off with the protests with Antifa versus the Proud Boys and all that kind of the craziness that was going on, or still is going on, I suppose. And her book really focuses on that civil unrest moving into other confusions that are going on, including purposely lit fires. And when those people were purposely lighting fires, I was like, holy smoke, it's amazing. Like that she was able to channel that. I'm using that. Mm-hmm. If you can see me, you can't see me, but I'm putting air quotes up there on the channeling. So, I mean, like, is this just, and I guess my question is, I like to, I like to think about preparedness in the sense of, I live in California, there's earthquakes and you have to be prepared for the earthquake. And that makes sense, right? And we've seen the Superstorm Sandy, for instance, coming in and pummeling New York City, and people weren't prepared for that. And there's video of people eating food out of dumpsters, things like this. So people should be generally prepared for disasters or storms or whatever that hits your area. In this case, it's a story that you can use to say, hey, prepare for the earthquake, but maybe other things are happening. I mean, with COVID, we saw the run on toilet paper and and things like this. I mean, it was hard to get milk and eggs for a while. I mean, I remember the neighborhood was getting together whenever we went shopping and saying, "Hey, what are you getting? Because can you please pick this up for me because I haven't found it." It was kind of an interesting times during the beginning of COVID to see the supply chain issues. That being said, what again, these books are made upon fantasy, right? It's an idea and a concept, but some of them seem to be coming true. What can people learn from? Because we tell people to be prepared, right? What can people learn from these books that you can't by taking a cert class and stuff like that? And then Dan, I want to have you ask a question there because I know one's burning in you right now. I can see it in your head. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah. The answer to how I'm going to reframe the question a bit, if that's okay. How can fiction make people understand concrete things that are not fiction, like the need to prepare and those sorts of things? And the answer is human beings and personal stories. And I'm probably like a lot of people, I don't know if I'm what kind of learner I am, but I know that if I look at a big, thick binder, an emergency management binder, and it has all these bullet points, and here are the 19 things you need to know, it kind of trickles into my head a little bit. But what I really remember and relate to and have a framework that I can plug into is, my uncle. What's my uncle like? And if I read a story about how somebody's uncle reacted and did something, it's more real. I can relate to it more. And so I think the answer to your question is information that is brought out, that is presented by situations and characters and dialogue. And when a character is thinking, is this a good idea or a bad idea? That's one way of saying, in a nonfiction sense, here are the pros and here are the cons, except it's more readable. Or with the cool thing with Audible is it's so easy to listen, when you're commuting or whatever you might be doing. So that's how it gets more real, and that's what you can learn. There are, of course, topical things. I always use the example, how many drops of bleach in a gallon of water that needs to be treated. And there's always that stuff. And that, of course, is laced throughout prepper fiction, but that's sort of an easy thing to show. But I think it is the personal connectivity people have with characters, real characters. Again, not the SEAL Team 6 guy that was too effective, right? I mean, I can't relate to that. But when they're regular people, and I consider myself a very regular guy, you've listened to the books, Todd, you would understand. There's all kinds of stories of me making real life, like, stupid decisions that are in there. So there's no sugarcoating. Let's see. Another thing that I think you can learn from prepper fiction that you can't learn any other way, especially with sort of a checklist, and that is the mental preparation, which in my opinion is the most important part. Understanding that stuff could happen. And Todd, you just gave a great example of that. You're reading this, or listening to this, I should say, about Antifa in Portland being completely uncontrolled, unrestrained, almost encouraged, rounding up the homeless, recruiting them to go do bad things and getting away with it and effectively being rewarded for it. And then starting a bunch of fires in Oregon, in the northwestern part of Oregon, where everybody in Oregon lives pretty much. And then people see that and they say, wow, this could happen. And why would you prepare for something you don't think can happen? Let's agree that there's something that cannot happen. I don't know, the artesian wells start spraying out gold coins, right? Okay, there's something that's not going to happen. Why would you have a plan to prepare for that? I should have come up with a better example, because everyone would just get big buckets, right? But the price of gold would go down, so it's not going to help. But anyway, why would you prepare for something that is just, in your mind, realistically never going to happen? The first step is understanding stuff could happen. And the way Shelby describes it in her books, she always talks to people around her who are completely switched off. I mean, they're in comfort zone. And I think there's less and less of that now because of the toilet paper thing you mentioned. In 2020, I think there's been a big learning curve on that. But she would say to people, oh, I got all this barbecue sauce based on a true story. And that's one of the things in her books, because, it could be the big earthquake. It was always the big earthquake. That's how she would explain it to people. And I know she did that in real life, so they wouldn't think she was a weirdo. They still thought she was kind of a weirdo because who needs that amount of barbecue sauce? Barbecue sauce is delicious. I think we all know that, but 25 cents a bottle. I mean, how are you going to beat that? It's just a matter of storage space at that point. Anyway, so the mental preparation you can get out of prep or fiction, and learning a variety of things, from topical things to mindset things to pros and cons and considerations via characters who are believable. So that, I think, is why it is so effective and so worth people's time, to be quite honest.
Well, so my question is this. I mean, let me make a statement, then I'll ask the question. I think a lot of it is application and how you can apply it. And we talk about preparedness, but there are so many different aspects. I mean, there's preparing and having a bunker that you can bunker down for weeks at a time. And then there's being prepared for any situation that could realistically happen. I mean, it does me no good to stock up my house and then there's a fire and I have to leave. So there's being preparedness. And I don't think ultimately we're doing good enough, especially right now during COVID. We should be taking advantage of this aspect to tell people how important it is to be prepared. But ultimately, it's a fear factor. It's like, I don't want to think something that bad can happen. Mm-hmm. But what are the little steps that, say your books, I haven't had the pleasure of listening to them yet, though I did put them on my list.
Thank you.
As far as what are the little steps that listening to your books or someone could take from it to do things in a step-by-step, slow, realistic fashion, that they're thinking these things through to realize this could happen. This is probably never going to happen to me, because it really is situational. I mean, there are things that just probably will not happen to you depending on where you are located at. And then there are others that the odds are it's going to happen. So as your books address these things, how does a listener able to pull that out and say, I should be doing this. I should take that into account. I should think this scenario through, because a lot of it is scenario based. I mean, having 2 weeks, having a month at home, but if you got a fire behind you, you have 2 weeks to throw in your car and leave. These are things that we also have to think. It's scenario based preparation, not just necessarily preparation in general.
Absolutely. And that's a very good point. There are two answers to your question. I will defer, first of all, to Shelby's books, because Shelby's books are from the perspective of a single mom living in an urban center who has very little money, and how she prepares. And I wasn't kidding about 25 cent, barbecue sauce. I think the best starter kit, if you will, the best way to prepare with little or no resources would be Shelby's books. And it's all laid out in there, especially in book 1. And it's all very realistic, and it's all true, which is why it's realistic. And then second, in my books, book 1 and a little bit of book 2 are the story of how I did it, how I would, this beans and rice and vacuum sealing and, first aid kits and learning first aid and going on YouTube and learning things. It wasn't like how to have a flock of ostriches and have ostrich meat and eat ostrich. It was nothing hard or complicated. It wasn't like, well, I like honey on my toast, so I'm going to go be a beekeeper. No, everything was practical. So, but you learn just from seeing how the character does it, because it's all true, starting off with, I can't remember if it's in the book or not. But for me, it started off with an empty plastic Snapple bottle. And I got on YouTube, and I don't know how I found this. You know how YouTube is like this rabbit trail. You can just amazing stuff. And it was about, I actually don't know if this is true or not, but I'll tell you what the video was about. It was about, if you really, really need to treat some water, you could consider putting it in a clear plastic bottle, putting it up on your roof and letting it sit out in the sun for 12 hours. Don't know if that's true. I have better ways of doing it now than that. So I have this thing about water being a very serious topic, right? And one you don't goof around with, and you don't throw out urban legends and myths. But anyway, so I still have it, by the way. I've kept it because it means a lot to me. And I can't remember if that's in the book or not. Probably Todd will know better than me, because I forget what was in the book and taken out by the editors. So, and then there's real life and what's in the book, and they're largely overlapping, but sometimes they're not. So anyway, I really can't remember what's in the book. I know that sounds weird. But anyway, so yeah, the small steps are definitely the way to go. You, of course, have to understand there's a reason to take the small steps. And one of the things we never do, either in our books or we have a podcast, Prepping 2.0, which is the next level of preparedness. And it centers a lot on community and group things like communications and group, sanitation, for lack of a better term. I mean, all the things you need, not just for your little family, but for your area and your mutual assistance group and your neighborhood and things like that. One of the things that we talk about on Prepping 2.0, I actually am losing my train of thought. I was just thinking about the podcast. I'm sorry. It happens. My apologies. There we go. Just dead stop on that one.
No worries. No, I mean,
start.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, like of why people start, and that's one of the things. Like, it's, and I'm gonna get into this question that was actually brought, or this point that was brought up by one of the listeners, by Robert. But the idea that as emergency managers, right? And especially at like local emergency management at cities, we teach the CERT programs or other sort of disaster preparedness programs. We want people to be prepared, and we go through this. But then, once they get into then they go, I don't want to say go to the other extremes, but there could be extremes like Dan was saying. But then we start making fun of like the people that are on doomsday preppers. And I think, that show was mildly interesting and it really just kind of put people in a bad light necessarily. But, we hear prepper now, or we hear that thing and we get cringy. Oh, why are we doing this? And it seems odd that we want people to be ready, but then we don't want them to be ready necessarily. Robert Wigman says, I really like using narrative storytelling to teach preparedness. And people gloss over when you give them the checklists and they don't retain the information. He says he hasn't read the books, but they're on his list for sure. Thanks, Robert, for that comment. I think that it's important to understand that I think people do learn narratively. I mean, historically speaking, right? Where did we learn? We learned when we sat around the campfire and, one of the shaman would come out and tell stories or whatever. I always use shaman because it sounds interesting. One of the elders would come out and tell stories. And so, that's what we're using. We're using storytelling to have people prepare. And then going back to that, I want to say one more comment, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Dan. You talk about the SEAL team guys. I always find it funny. I read Brad Thor and I read some other like Tom Clancy's and things like this. And I always find it funny that in those books, it's always like this one guy who, was a Green Beret or SEAL Team 6 member. He retired. He's living up in the mountains trying to stay away from everybody. And he gets pulled back into government service because for whatever reason, he's the only one that can solve this problem, And it's just, it kind of always, that's the question I always ask, like, why that guy? I mean, there's like literally thousands of Navy SEALs and Green Beret guys that they could put teams everywhere, but why do they need to pull this one dude out of retirement? But that's just I digress a little bit. Dan, I know you have another question burning in you.
Yeah, it goes about what we're saying is, how do we get people to do what we're asking them to do? How do we get them to prepare? How do we get them to embrace that these things, that they need to do these things in order to be better prepared to take care of themselves and their family? And I think there's a level of engagement that needs to take place from us as emergency managers. Obviously, we need to be engaging, but I think ultimately it's to let people know. And as you pointed out, Glenn, is the 25-cent bottle of barbecue sauce, that it needs to be done. It doesn't need to be done like I need to go out and I need to purchase all this stuff overnight and I don't have the money and how am I going to do this? It's a steady day, daily, almost weekly, and you just bridge it out, right? I mean, as far as like you got to go at this at a pace that is applicable to you, that it fits the individual, and it makes it understand too that I don't need to go out and buy everything I need right now on Amazon and expect it to show up at my door tomorrow. It's you build these kits based on what your needs, and as we've said, they're setting fires and mountains are burning, and people that are bunkering down right now, their mountains are on fire. They can't be there, so these scenarios need to be brought through, but they need to be a daily engagement. So I'm assuming in your books, there's as you said, it's an escalation, right? Just as in preparing, there's an escalation that takes place. You start small and you escalate and you build and you build and you build until you're where you need to be.
Absolutely, it escalates in book one, and that's been my experience. That's been everybody else's. One thing, Dan, that I think is going to make this problem you're describing a little easier to solve is 2020, and everyone has seen the toilet paper, whatever it is about toilet paper that just it resonates with people. After that happened, let's say April or so, March, April, in our personal lives, because we use fake names and not a lot of people know what we actually do. We have reasons to do it. Shelby in particular has a bunch of creepy dudes, stalker types. And so we kind of like to keep that to a minimum. But anyway, people who didn't know that we were preppers, and you're right, Todd, that's a terrible term and I hate it and it's pejorative, but they were coming up to us and saying, wow, I think maybe, I need to take some steps. And we're like, yeah, well, tell me what you're going to do. You know what I mean? So I think it really stuck with people because of that. You're so right about this being slow and steady. Never, as I say, never go into debt, never break laws. Another reason to go about it slow and steady is that conditions change as you go about this. Facts change. There are new threats that emerge. There are some political potential problems right now that may be surging or receding depending on a variety of things. Another reason to go about it slow is there's so much to learn and know. I don't want people to be overwhelmed. There's a lot of stuff that you need to have. Technology is improving. Prices are going down. Classic example is water treatment. Life straws used to be $100, and now on Black Friday sales, they're $8. Right. So if you do everything at once, one of the reasons that's a bad idea is you're not able to take advantage of a drop in life straw prices, for example. All are good reasons to go slow and steady. One thing we always let people know, especially on the show, Prepping 2.0, is that even if you're doing a little bit, you're way ahead of the general population. So don't be discouraged. It can't, the goal can't be the multi-million-dollar bunker with the small scale home size nuclear reactor to provide your own electricity. That's the goal. Then just give up now. And so that can't be it. And so a lot of what we do on Prepping 2.0 is actually motivational, and it's letting people know that you don't need to have all this stuff. And it is truly a lifestyle. It is a new way of thinking. 10 years ago, when I lived in the suburbs, I would never be caught wearing what I'm wearing on a weekday. And I wasn't prepared in a bunch of other stuff. It's taken about 10 years to get where we are. And we're okay with that as far as the pace goes. And something is better than nothing. And of course, for emergency managers, the more prepared your customers, your clients, Absolutely. Your residents are, the better it is. I think one of the big things, to come back around to 2020 and the toilet paper, one of the big things that I think people have learned is that the government can't just provide everything for them. A friend of mine was an Air National Guardsman, New York Air Guardsman during Sandy, the storm, hurricane, whatever it was. And he said that Superstorm, he would tell stories, and he tells them better than I do. And I'm not going to try to imitate his awesome Bronx accent, but he would tell stories about people being out of their minds 12 hours into this. And they really were screaming, where's the FEMA truck with like dinner? They expected like a hot meal in a clamshell, right? To just be like delivered to them. And they were stunned, legitimate. They weren't just mad. They actually thought that was going to happen, that it was going to be Meals on Wheels, and it was going to be like, I don't know, DoorDash or whatever, like stuff was just going to show up like a half rack of ribs and some fries. And I think 2020 has shown people that that's not true. So then the next question is, well, what do I need to do? So I think 2020, as awful as it's been, and oh, by the way, we got 2 more months of awfulness ahead of us, I think, it has actually had some positive effects on the general population.
Robert Whitman says it's a process too, right? He goes, I checked for my supplies and found some things lacking, needing tweaking. It's no different than any other process where we can't where we can't be one and done. I get it. Sorry about that, Robert. It's be adaptive and be flexible. And absolutely,
Yeah.
right. I mean, it is a process, and you get stuff, and you have to go through. This is the stuff that we again going back to CERT programs. This is the stuff that we teach in the preparedness section of CERT. We tell people go to the store. If I use SpaghettiOs as a reference. I don't know why SpaghettiOs I pick on. SpaghettiOs. You need to send me my check, please. I say, you go and you buy your 4 cans of SpaghettiOs, you rotate them through because that's what your kids are going to eat, and you buy food and stuff that you need that your kids will eat. So it is a process. Oh, one more thing, Paul. Can I come over to your house if you have a small nuclear power plant? That's amazing. So Paul says, you guys don't have your own small scale nuclear power plant? Yes, Paul. I'm coming to your house for sure.
Well, we still haven't got all the permits. So we're not going to tell you where that is because the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the NEST team are probably going to be very interested in where we're located. But no.
That's good stuff. So, I'm going to circle back here, and I know we're kind of running a little bit over, but I think the conversation is a lot of fun. That's the thing that I find interesting, number one, is that people, we kind of discount the idea of these preparedness books, or there's this book here, your series 299 days, you have The Great State, and then there's other books that are out there that are around the same thing. And what I find interesting is, number one, just because there's not zombies in the books doesn't make them not interesting. So many zombie books and movies and stuff like that are out there. But these books are very interesting. They have some practical application associated with them. If you just enjoy, and I'm going to say, enjoy the fantasy part of it. You know what I mean? What I mean by that is enjoy the fiction, because hopefully it stays fiction. Because if a lot of these books that are out there, you do not want the doomsday scenario that there's being written in here to become true. But they're interesting, they're fun to watch. If it's like if you like westerns, you like western movies. I enjoy these type of books. The doomsday scenario books are just fun to read for me. I find 299 a great series. I've given it away for Christmas presents. My nephew, I've given it to him, and he enjoys it. So that being said, Christmas is coming up, or holiday season is coming up, for whatever you celebrate. It's an option for you to do to be able to purchase these series. It's it's 299 days, and it's the Great State. The links are in our show notes, and so I think it's important. So Dan, we're getting some more conversation going on here, and why don't you read the next one, Dan, from Robert Whitnam?
I'm actually not seeing the comments on.
Oh, you're not?
There we go.
So he says it's really hard for people to understand that FEMA or outside help won't be there right away. It's almost like some people think that will pop up through a portal or something. It's been a long process to explain at the PNW to get 2 weeks because, you're right. We're moving to 2 weeks of red preparedness over 72 hours. And then Paul says the biggest challenge is to practice your plans, especially with kids and elderly that just don't move quickly. Absolutely. But
they're vulnerable population, kids and elderly.
Yeah,
they're always in a vulnerable population aspect. They're always, I say always, but mostly they're reliant on others to help them and prepare for them and be there for them. So that's an aspect that we always need to keep in the back of our mind. But I think ultimately, overall, and I think, I think we're all on the same page, is consistency is what we really need to get, the consistency mindset in a positive way. You don't want to be consistently robbing somebody or consistently in a mindset that I'm consistently thinking about what do I need to do to prepare, or do I need to buy can I buy an extra case of water? Can I buy an extra case of toilet paper? Can I buy an extra case of whatever it may be, or an extra can or an extra bottle, whatever it may be, to help to consistently start building that preparation for whatever may happen coming forward. But it's a mindset. It really is. And we got to apply it consistently in a positive way that helps us develop as we move down the road.
Well, Glenn, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. We went over about 15 minutes over what we normally do. But it was a great conversation. Is there anything you'd like to say to everybody before we let you go?
Yeah, one quick thing. Our podcast, which is free, is a great way to every week have more tips, more guests, more motivation, and it's Prepping 2.0. We're on all the outlets, iTunes and Stitcher. The best way to find out more about the podcast, get it for free, and also get links to the books is our website, prepping2-0.com, prepping2-0.com. Give it a listen, give it a try. And I think once you try it, every week you're going to be waiting for the Prepping 2.0 episode to come out. And that's what we aim to do. And it's an absolute joy and pleasure to do the podcast. It's great to come on shows like yours. Love it. We're getting the message out. It's very fulfilling. It's what Shelby and I were meant to do. And we get up early and we do the work and we get it done because it's important and we love it. So thank you guys for giving me a megaphone to talk about preparedness from a slightly different angle than maybe it typically is talked about on here.
Absolutely. Again, Glenn, thank you again for your time. Everybody else, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. I know there's a lot more questions coming in, so maybe Glenn, if you can pop over and answer some of those later.
Sure.
But it was great talking to Glenn. It was great having Dan on here and everybody. And again, hey, I just want to do one thing about the elections. Everybody, let's keep our heads on, screwed on tight and right, and that, don't lose our mind over this. We have gone through these in the past, and everything will be okay. That being said, everybody, please join us next week and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and of course, your favorite podcast player. And don't forget to subscribe and rate us. Thank you so much for your time, and stay safe and stay healthy and stay hydrated.